Hello, everyone. Welcome to this class of ours. And this is Eduf 411 Comparative Education and International Studies. As I promised, we are going to deal with the definition of comparative education. So, what is comparative education? Comparative education has been defined in different ways by various authors. There has been no clearly accepted definition of comparative education. Education, however, has different definitions. There are quite a number of scholars who have attempted to define what comparative education is. All of them, or most of them, have not come to the agreement of what comparative education is. But there has been a general consensus among scholars or educationists that comparative education is concerned with comparisons in education. What am I saying? As we have always told you since first year, that definitions are a very difficult thing in that each scholar has his or their own way of looking at things. Comparative education is not an exception. So, comparative education is or deals with comparisons in education. Comparative education is an analytical survey of systems of education and problems with a view of establishing the similarities and the differences. What are we saying? We are saying that a comparative educationist will look at the similarities in a system of education that a comparativist can also go and look at the differences or the distinctions in different systems of education. So it makes comparative education makes comparisons across geopolitical, historical, and cultural branches or boundaries of education. For example, one may compare the system of education in Kenya and also Ugandan system of education. You can compare the two. Or one can decide to compare whatever issue that is facing private schools in Uasin Gishu and the one that is facing public schools in the same region, Uasin Gishu. So, comparative education deals with comparative comparison, the comparison within education setup. You compare issues, educational issues. You can also compare the similarities. You can compare the issues, the problems, the successes, and the challenges across the education systems. So the process of comparison involves analyzing forces which make for resemblance and differences between systems of education. We can, for example, look at the structure of education in Kenya and compare it with the structure of education in Uganda. We can also look at an issue such as training of teachers in Kenya and compare it with the training of teachers in Uganda. We can look at the comparison between methods of teaching in Kenyan elementary school as compared to methods of teaching in Britain at the same level. So, what are we saying? Comparative education deals with comparisons in education. We compare things in education. So then looking at the reasons as to why different solutions have been attempted to problems in education that seem common to all. At the moment, we are facing the problem of financing education in Kenya. Generally, financing secondary school education, financing higher education. So this is the challenge that Kenya is grappling with. We can take this problem and compare it with whatever is happening in a country like South Africa. How are South Africans or the South African government financing its education system? How are they financing their high school education? How are they financing their higher education? So we can compare financing of education in Kenya and the way the government of South Africa is also financing the education of its citizens. So I end this section, I want to give you an assignment. I ask you to pick a pen and a paper and write this question. I hope you are ready. If you are ready, write this. Use your own words to define what comparative education is. Or, in your own words, what is comparative education? Now, if you're through with that, allow me to move and talk about the purpose of studying comparative education. The purpose of studying comparative education. The purpose of studying comparative education. There are enough reasons why prospective teachers should study comparative education. And these reasons are given as follows. One, I want to talk about intellectual reasons. Students will go to class, sit down, and listen to their lecturers because they want to develop intellectually. So, comparative education is studied for the sole reason of intellectual development. So, it is an intellectual activity that scholars can pursue to the highest level possible of comparative education. An individual, a student, a student teacher will go to class and sit down and study comparative education so as to enhance their intellectual capabilities concerning this area. So we are saying that you just go to class simply to learn to know, so that you want to know. As intellectual, you just want to know things in comparative education. You want to know, you want to acquaint yourself to the description of education system in Kenya. You just want to know what this CBC is. You just want to know and describe a system of education in France. You may just want to go to class and know what takes place in Germany, for example. So you just want to know. There is no other motivation other than intellectual reasons. This knowledge will help the individual to understand the educational system better. For example, will not just hear of CBC education, but you will now go deeper and understand what CBC education is. You will also be able to learn other systems of education. You'll be able to describe other world systems of education. Just to know. Knowledge for its own sake is enough reason for one to study comparative education. Just to know. You just go to class because you want to know. You just want to know what happens in Finland. You just go to class so that you know the education system of Russia. You just go to class because you want to know why Chinese are the way they are, or the Chinese education system is the way it is. So just going to class to learn because of intellectual reasons. So that is one of the purposes of comparative education. Another purpose of comparative education is for planning purposes. Modern societies have come to appreciate the importance of planning various problems that are associated with overpopulation, underproduction, diseases, economic non-viability, industrialization, and social ills can be tackled through planning. Planning requires careful formulation of objectives, establishment of priorities, and the identification of means to achieve those objectives. Since an educational policy affects millions of people, rational decisions need to be made so that policy can achieve the desired results. This calls for the proper planning that comparative education can provide in helping at hand. So that you don't just wake up one day and say that we want 50 billion to build about 10 or so schools. No, there has to be planning. How will you plan? Comparative education will assist you to know that school country A was able to do A, B, C, D, and after some time, they were faced with this need, that need, and that one. So that as you start a system of education such as CBC, you will be able to know the needs of that education system or the needs of the number of teachers that will have to be recruited or employed after a certain period of time. So, with such knowledge, comparative education will assist you to plan on the resources and manpower of how you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. So, comparative education can just be learned for planning purposes. Now, we can also learn comparative education for practicability. Practical, from the word practical, practicability. Comparative education can be learned just for practicability. Education operates in a practical age where it is now taken as any other good. The pattern of education that have no practical utility are being reformed. For instance, in United Kingdom, states have approved primary schools whose objection or objectives was to teach the masses how to read and write so as to enable them to work better in the industrialized society. These systems have survived with modification and improvement. In the former USSR and China, work experiences was emphasized and was very much affected by the curriculum. In the United States of America, comprehensive schools on the principle of utility and practicability have replaced grammar schools. In Kenya, the education system was reformed in 1985 with a view to make it more elitist and had no practical utility in the pupil involved. The problem of reforming education system to make it more practical and of utility must be studied for solution, and this can be done better through the study of comparative education. And that is why as we roll out CBC education or competence-based education, we must understand where we are coming from. Over time, it has been discovered that 844 has been promoting rote learning, that learners have just been memorizing, been taught how to memorize to pass exams without getting the values of education. And that is why, after comparative educations went out and compared whatever is happening in other countries such as China, they came back with the reports and said that this is what is happening out there. And that is why Kenyan government, through reports, decided to implement CBC education, which is being rolled out at the moment. Another reason as to why people learn comparative education is for humanitarian viewpoint. Humanitarian viewpoint. The current world is characterized by increasing problems that are affecting the human population in various ways. Most of the former stable regions of the world have been affected by the wars. Understand that at the moment we have wars in various countries. Country like Russia is at war with Ukraine. And you must understand who is this behind Ukraine. Powerful countries, and these are Western powers such as USA, France, Germany, UK, are behind Ukraine. And silently, it goes without saying that Eastern powers such as China are behind USSR or Russia. So whatever is happening is that superpowers, these very powerful countries, the so-called developed world, is at war with each other. So the problems experienced in these countries do affect their neighbors and other countries. Look at whatever we are being faced with. The high inflation rates in Kenya and other parts of the world, the high cost of living, the high cost of food, the high cost of wheat and maize and these other things is being affected or is being caused by these wars. It is also important to know, for instance, that the Gulf War that started in 1991 affected the world oil prices, and the same also happened in 1971 during the crisis in the Middle East. Since the Declaration of Human Rights by the UN in 1948, there has been heightened aspiration for peace, freedom, quality, and a better life. As part of the human rights to education, access to education has always been a yearning among many. Many countries, including Kenya, provides universal primary education, the so-called the UPE. Therefore, the knowledge of each other education system is necessary and can better be acquired through comparative education. Another reason as to why student teachers need to study comparative education is the need to see education in world perspective. The need to see education in world perspective. Most countries of the world have identical problems in their education perspectives. Therefore, it is possible for them to learn problems from each other on how they resolved a particular problem. For instance, when Kenya was implementing free primary education in 2003, Nigeria could have provided some of the clues of the problem, which were of the expected and the solutions to those expected problems. Uganda, a close neighbor to Kenya, which had undergone the similar problems and practical solutions on how to manage the UPE, could have provided the insights of possible solutions on how Kenya was going to solve its own problems. One would want to know how nations have struggled to establish media of instruction. The comparative approach would yield a deeper understanding of educational problems. In this area, the purpose of comparative education would be better understanding of the challenges or the circumstances and to have a better equipment to fulfill new responsibilities. This will help the understanding of why countries, educational systems, and the possessive while others are backward. Why are some countries developed and why are others not developed? There are these famous Asian tigers. We are told that at independence, Kenyan economy was far much better than the Asian tigers. But a few years, precisely about 50 years after independence, Asian tigers are now developed and Kenya is still struggling. So the knowledge of comparative education will assist us to know why Kenya is lagging behind, yet it was at par with Asian tigers at independence. The administrative machines or machineries of Switzerland, Canada, USA, and Japan are combined with local autonomy and decentralization control. Consequently, in the educational system of these countries, we find a reflection of their political philosophy. Thus, the political philosophy and administrative system of various countries determine the administration and control of education. Another reason as to why student teachers should learn comparative education is to promote innovation in education. To promote innovation in education. There are many innovations which are being introduced in education today. The development of technology has facilitated new methods of organizing learning. For instance, use of radio, television, ICT to deliver knowledge, use of other aspects of media, Open University, African Virtual University, and computer assisted learning have been introduced to education. All these have facilitated education in a comparative context. The USA system has facilitated the spread of innovation in education in the world. Another reason as to why student teachers need to study comparative education is economics of education. In the recent years, research has generated a realization that the spread of education is positive or positively correlated with increased productivity. For example, former USSR improved her economy by eradicating illiteracy. Also, all the developed countries have progressed by investing more in education. On the other hand, most of the developing world or the developing countries have generalize the problem of education, unemployment, or brain drain by improving the education system. Another reason as to why student teachers need to learn comparative education is education for international understanding. Education for international understanding. This is a centralized purpose for studying comparative education. The two world wars make the two world wars, that is the First World War and the Second World War, made man to seek even more serious the various ways of promoting international understanding. UNESCO has recognized that wars begin from the mind of men. Therefore, in order to stop another war, from international understanding is essential. And how will you how will you enforce international understanding? For you to understand another country, you need to understand their thinking or their education system. To deal with the labor problems and education, International Labour Organization or ILO and UNESCO were established. The Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 by the United Nations Organization, as a way of enhancing peace, has contributed to the international understanding. Unilateral and multilateral cooperation have been developed to promote international understanding. Education is seen as a possible way to enhance educational understanding. To understand other nations of the world, their philosophies of life, education, culture, sociology, and their understanding of forces, be it at geographical, cultural, local, and religious front, you have to study the education system. And how do you go about it? Is to study comparative education. Now, another reason as to why comparative education has to be studied by students or student teachers is to relax international pride. To relax international pride. This is necessary for those countries that feel to be more superior to other countries in case of technology, military, economic prosperity, military prowess, and among other things. They need to understand that other countries for their sustenance and therefore have to work in harmony or mutual benefit for each other. Comparative thinking and international perspective is essential for citizens to get along with diverse global society. The comparison of challenges or the comparison of challenges that are being faced by students is very, very vital and very, very essential. We can learn a lot from one another through the study of comparative education. Now, before I end this lesson, allow me, allow me to ask this question. Before I end this lesson, allow me to give you this as a take home or take away assignment. Are you ready? Pick a paper and a pen and write this. Are you ready? All right. It has been argued that comparative education is outdated and therefore should not be studied by modern day student teachers. Full stop. Discuss. Now, this is the end of our lesson today. I want to thank all of you for having attended it. I wish you a nice supper. Have a good evening. Bye.